For over 10 years, we at Climate One have been engaging policymakers, influencers, entrepreneurs, and activists and scientists in broad, respectful, candid conversations about everything climate. Food, energy, water, technology, transportation, housing. We've had huge success bringing together people who think they're on opposite sides of issues. When they sit down and have a candid conversation, they often find common ground and the basis for real solutions. We're emotional beings. Thoughtful, inclusive conversations create the conditions in which the changes we want to see become possible. So I want to hear from you. When you talk about climate, how do you talk about it? More importantly, what do you want to be talking about? With whom? Join the conversation. Even make your own video. Invite your friends to join you. Let's talk climate.
Voters are casting ballots today in New York and Kentucky, where young candidates of color are taking on establishment favorites. We'll explore the politics of 2020 as the country struggles to reckon with structural racism, the pandemic, and the looming threat of climate disruption. Along the way, we'd love to hear from you, so please share your questions in the comments section of the live stream. I'm Greg Dalton, and I'm delighted to welcome three exciting guests. Tiffany Cross is co-founder and managing editor of The Beat DC. She previously ran the Washington Bureau of BET News and covered Capitol Hill for CNN. I'd like to note that my colleagues at the Commonwealth Club will host Tiffany on Thursday, July 23rd to discuss her new book, Say It Louder, Black Voters, White Narratives, and Saving Our Democracy. Rich Tao is president of Engageus, a communications firm. For the past 15 months, he's conducted focus groups with swing voters in key districts, including Youngstown, Ohio, Appleton, Wisconsin, and Erie, Pennsylvania. Rick Wilson is a longtime Republican political strategist who got his start in the campaign of the first President Bush. He's editor-at-large at the Daily Beast and author of Running Against the Devil, a plot to save America from Trump and Democrats from themselves. He's pinch hitting today for his colleague at the Lincoln Project, Steve Schmidt. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Tiffany, let's begin with you. Will the 2020 election be determined by swing voters in battleground states or turning out the Democratic and Republican bases?
Definitely, I think the latter. I think anybody who's still laser focused on swing voters is operating from a playbook of yesteryear. I question even this whole theory of swing voters. I think if somebody is still on the fence at this point about who to vote for, then they are emphatically not a swing voter. I do think there are people, we have to look at it through the lens of this is not a choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, but a choice between Joe Biden or stay home for a lot of people. So I think with all the attention that you hear in the media landscape that's focused on swing voters, it feels a bit out of step. It feels like a political playbook from 20 years ago. And perhaps if we paid attention to the voting trends of midterms, that we would know that swing voters do not necessarily determine presidential outcomes.
Rick Wilson, Donald Trump has never shown an interest in growing his base, and his support has never exceeded 50% of the American people. Bill Kristol recently tweeted, quote, "You look at the polls and think he can't win, but Trump's path to victory doesn't depend on persuading Americans. It depends on voter suppression, mass disinformation, foreign interference, and unabashed use of executive branch power to shape events and perceptions." Do you agree with Bill Kristol?
All those things are correct. Those are all correct answers from what Bill said, and it is a moment where you have to look at the electoral map as it is. This is a battle in the Electoral College. It is not a national election at all. I know how California is going to vote. I know how Alabama is going to vote. I know how Washington State is going to vote, and I know how Arkansas is going to vote. These are not states that are in play. So the model of swing states still exists. In those swing states, we have places that moved from, remarkably, Obama to Trump. We have voter pools in states like Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, North Carolina, Arizona, and Florida, where there are a meaningful number of voters who inexplicably moved from Obama to Trump. And in 2018, they moved from Trump to Democrats. So it's really not a matter of swing voters as a pool nationally. It is a matter of that these particular states on the Electoral College map have a much different set of impetuses and character than you might think with the big blue or the big red states. So when I look at a place like Michigan, I see a pool of voters where suburban female voters in Oakland and Macomb County outside of Detroit who went for Donald Trump, they held their nose in 2016 and voted for Donald Trump. In 2018, they said, no more. I can't handle this. I don't want my kids growing up watching this kind of person. So they voted against Trump's enablers from Congress. They voted against Republican candidates down the ticket because they could. Now, those folks are going to be back in play this year. Some will be pulled to the tribal necessities of our politics because both sides, and Tiffany's right, we have two intense party bases in this country. Some will be pulled back to that intense Republican base. Some will be pulled back to that intense Democratic base. But they are identifiable through survey research, polling, focus groups, data analysis, voter file analysis. We are with the Lincoln Project, we're digging into that. And this is a game of small numbers. Look, the president won election in 3 states by 77,000 votes. He won Florida, a state with 20 million people in it, by 150,000 votes. So going out there and hunting down these small pools of persuadables is critical because we're in an electoral college game. That game is not about the popular vote. The game is not about the national mood. That is about going into a place like Florida and flipping 150,000 votes, or a place like Michigan and flipping 70 or 30,000 votes, or a place like Wisconsin flipping 43,000 votes. So all these places that were narrow adventures in 2016, we saw that in a lot of those places they were former Obama states and voters. We got to flip them back, and we've got to keep them away from Trump in 20.
Rich Dow, you've been talking to these people for 15 months, swing voters. Who are they? Where are they? What's a profile? What do they think?
It's a great question. So it's been a fascinating exercise, crisscrossing the upper Midwest for a year, and then now the last few months doing it via Zoom. And I'll tell you, there are a few characteristics that stand out about these swing voters. The first thing is I would describe them as serial presidential monogamists. They fell in love with Bush. After 8 years, they fell out of love and fell in love with Obama. They loved Obama for 8 years, fell out of love with him, and loved Trump. And for me, the question is, are they on a 4-year trajectory or an 8-year trajectory? The second thing I'd say is that not all, but a sizable number are what you'd call classic low information voters. They get their news from local news sources, local TV, local websites. The majority are not getting it from CNN, MSNBC, or Fox. So what they know about what's going on in the wider world, wider policy conversation is actually quite limited. Most of them have never heard of the Green New Deal, for example. So as we think about who they are, we have to understand that their personalities are such that they're not driven by policy as much as they're driven also by personalities, and they're driven by a desire for change. They're sort of perpetually dissatisfied. They start off satisfied, the satisfaction wanes, and it wanes to the point where they're looking to take on something new. There's always the classic, are they Coke or are they Pepsi? They're both. They like both kinds of soda. They can vote for a D or vote for an R, depending upon who attracts them more. It's not a matter of either or. It's an and they just have to decide which one is more attractive. And those are the things I think are key attributes of those folks.
Tiffany Cross, you still think that there's too much attention played on these you call them mythical swing voters?
I do. I think, and I take Rick's point for sure about the electoral map, but I think still, if you look at 2016 and 2018 and even 2012, this Obama-Trump swing voter, when you look at the reason why they jumped from Obama to Trump, the chief reason among them was they all held racial animus. They had hostile views on race. And so for me, if that is what we're calling a swing voter, it does trouble me that candidates get it drilled into their head that that's the person you need to go after. And there's data to back this up. There was a study done by UCLA, Princeton, and UC Irvine that disaggregated voters who switched, who were the Obama-Trump voters, and they found they were not likely to be suffering economically, but suffering from animus on race issues. So I am just a bit uncomfortable at trying to appeal to that wing or base of the party, particularly when you saw in 2018, when you tried to energize the Democratic base, when you spoke a language directly to people, they paid attention and they became engaged in the process. There was a lot of first-time voters, a lot of younger voters. And then to Tyler's point about they get a lot of their news from local news. I think that's a huge issue because on the national stage, sure, we have Fox News and they're problematic, but at the local level, you do have Sinclair Broadcasting, which is extremely conservative. They mandate scripts that their anchors read. They tailor their messaging that favors conservative, right-wing Republican messaging, and that feeds by osmosis this Trump narrative about this country. So I just, when we look at what happened on the Democratic side of politics, at voters who resurrected Joe Biden's campaign, and then when you take a step back and look at the larger landscape, at people who can be excited and engaged in this process, and then when you consider what all these people have to leapfrog over when it comes to GOP-led voter suppression, when it comes to foreign election interference that specifically targets communities of color, I just think what would happen if we focused on that and not people who switched from Obama to Trump?
Rick Wilson, is there unconscious bias in this?
But the swing voters that we saw in 18 were Republican women crossing over to vote for Democrats. That's why the Republicans lost 41 seats. Those are the swing voters I'm looking for. I want to hold on to those so they don't drift back into the Republican column. And there's an interesting pool, and Rich may be able to speak to this. There is an interesting pool of independent men and Democratic men who tend to be less than college educated, who tend to be a little more ex-urban, who tend to be union workers, who you can get them back by being a fighter for them. You can work them by being a fighter for them. They feel like everybody gets to DC and screws them. And with Trump, because his portrayal of himself was so broad and so vivid for them, they thought he was going to be the one that saved them, and he didn't. And the trade deals hurt them, and his handling of COVID hurt them. So there are people out there, and believe me, there are plenty of people motivated by race in the voter pool. Plenty of them. You're never going to get them anyway. Right. Joe Biden or not, white guy or not, you're not going to get them. They were motivated against Obama, very much so, in a lot of those cases. Those folks tend to be older at this point, thank goodness, right? But they're there in the swing states.
Yeah.
If I could jump in on this for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's just say briefly, keep in mind, these Obama-Trump voters voted for Obama. They voted for an African-American for president. So the issue of race isn't the issue for me that I'm looking at here with these swing voters. What I'm looking at is a somewhat different phenomenon that Rick touched on, which is their America First orientation, which is putting America first when it comes to immigration and America first when it comes to trade. They're two sides of the same coin. And so for Biden to succeed, the way to win over those folks is to make sure that they're arguing an America First agenda, not necessarily using that term, but using the same impetus and the same animus that people have toward making sure that America is put first without being xenophobic about it and racist about it. I think there's a positive side to that story if it's done well. So that's important.
Bill Clinton actually achieved that back in the day.
So I'm certain Rich is not suggesting that because somebody voted for Obama, they're not racist, but I do want to address Rick's point about the swing voter and the women, the Republican women. I think during midterms, we saw support from Republican women shrink from 53%, I think, to 49%. And I just have to say, I would never put my faith or my livelihood or my life in the hands of that wing of the party, trusting that they might vote in their interest. I do think it says something, Rick, when it was a local race and they were voting on local issues. And I totally take your point. I don't disagree with you on that. But I think on a national stage, can we trust that when they look at whatever landscape they're judging by, can we trust that they're going to vote in their interest and not vote for Trump? Maybe you do. I don't trust them to do that. I would rather focus on people who have skin in the game, pun intended, and who are ready to hit the pavement. I just, somebody who in 2016 thought Trump was a viable candidate is a problem.
It's not that I trust them, it's that I'm going to throw a tremendous amount of money and television at them to make sure that we keep them on the side of light in this election. And we're going to do the things we have to do to litigate a case against Donald Trump so that those folks understand that if they're standing with Donald Trump, they're standing with things that they find horrible: bullying, cruelty, kids in cages, racism, the 300-pound Confederate guy with the AR-15 and the Confederate flag on the steps of the Capitol. Those things, if you frame this election with those big terms for those independent and female suburban voters, who do tend to lean a little more center, they're center-right voters. If we do that, I think there's a better chance of that. But I don't take anything for granted. I don't do anything based on hope. We build tools and implement them.
Yeah.
Rich
One thing I would jump in a quick.
Rich Tao, let me ask you. Sure, Rich Tao.
Yeah, I was just going to say very quickly that in our experience in doing the Swing Voter Project, we also have interviewed Romney Clinton voters. And those folks, almost to a person, detest Donald Trump. So I wouldn't worry too much about them going back to voting for Trump again. The animus there is off the chart. It's the Obama-Trump voters who I think are the key to the swing voter component, not the Romney Clinton voters.
Rich Tao, will issues matter in this election, or is this just a referendum on Donald Trump? And will issues matter, and which ones?
Well, I would say that issues will matter. The question is, of course, what's going on in the country come October and early November, and whether we're still in the midst of a pandemic, what the economy looks like, what race relations look like in the U.S. All that's going to matter, plus whatever else might erupt between now and then. Of course, we have no idea. So yes, I think issues will matter. I think one other thing I would say, though, is that I wouldn't call this entire election a referendum on Trump. I think it's a huge mistake in targeting swing voters to say that, oh, we'll just make Trump as miserable as possible looking to swing voters, and they'll have to take Biden. And in talking to a number of these people, you still have to make a case for Joe Biden. The thing I've uncovered, which has stunned me, and I'm not easily stunned, I've been doing this almost 20 years, is how focus group after focus group, folks of these Obama-Trump voters know almost nothing about Biden's biography. They know that he was Obama's vice president for 8 years, and that's about it. They don't know he was a senator. They don't know he's from Delaware. They don't know anything about his family background. So to me, he is a tabula rasa to a massive segment of these swing voters. And so I'm not so convinced that you can beat something with nothing. Biden has to define himself for these folks in order for enough of them to vote for Biden for him to win.
I would just say, I would add, Greg, that that's probably true across the board, Rich. I think there are people on both sides of the divide who don't know a lot. I think, all of us on this panel consume the minutia of government and, read 8 papers before the sun comes up. Most people out in the country are not doing that. They're getting kids to school and figuring out how to pay their mortgage, et cetera. But even the people who do know Biden, I would say, are not overly excited about his candidacy. I mean, when you look at the numbers and break down the data, it is mostly a vote against Trump, not necessarily a vote for Biden, which I will say concerns me, because if he's not an excitable candidate, and you have to consider this new electorate that's a part of this process now. And for them, Obama was their floor, not their ceiling. And so previously, people could only see the possible, and now people are seeing the impossible. And they're asking, how do we reimagine America? How do we reimagine every part of democracy that we thought was written in stone? And so I think Biden has made some mistakes here or there where he's tried to make safe choices and tried to walk the middle of the road. And I would argue in this time, that's how you become political roadkill. I think his candidacy is going to hedge heavily on his running mate. So I really hope that he picks a running mate who can excite the masses and people who are used to having a president who, can inspire you and was an orator, like a Sunday morning Baptist preacher. I don't think there's enough younger people in the electorate who realize that's a once in a lifetime type candidate, a once in a lifetime type president. I think there are a lot of people who have an Obama hangover and think that, we need somebody who's going to inspire us like that. And politics and policy are not always inspiring. Sometimes it's boring. Sometimes you have to do the work and actually read about people's platform and how it speaks to you. So I say that to say that I really hope the Biden campaign understands and realizes that, with the groundswelling from folks like Rick at the Lincoln Project. But I think if he tries to make a safe choice this go round, that it could be incredibly devastating to the Democratic Party.
Rick Wilson, you're spending lots of money with other Republicans against Donald Trump, but is there a risk that you're not going to excite people? You might turn people off and they won't vote. They're not going to get excited about Biden?
Well, this campaign runs in basically three columns. The first column is what we do very, very well, which is keep Donald Trump personally off balance. We make sure that Donald Trump never has a good night's sleep. We make sure that Donald Trump is watching our Twitter feed 24 hours a day. He knows there's going to be something new coming down the pike at him all the time. You know, as somebody put it to me, imagine you were running through the woods and there's always a chance a wolf is going to come out and take a nip out of you at any moment. So we're the wolves in this equation, and Donald Trump, he can't escape us. So that'll run through the campaign. We're also prosecuting the case against Donald Trump because from our research, we've seen that there are voters who may dislike him, may think he's doing a bad job sort of generically, but we've now got things like COVID where there is a price tag in terms of lives and in terms of our economy. And we're going to articulate that in the ways that, as former Republicans, we're very skilled at. We're going to focus that very, very fine set of tools we've developed over a long period to communicate that message to voters so they really have a clear choice, that it's not just a partisan question, that it is a demonstration of how incompetent and corrupt and unstable Donald Trump is. And the final part of this will be more persuasion. There will be more uplift. That's going to be much later in the process, though, because for right now, there's a value added to this, to keeping Donald Trump's numbers in the 40 and sub 40 range. That prohibits him from getting a big lift under his wings. That prohibits him from getting to takeoff speed. That prevents him from starting to deploy the resources that he's been raising in a smart way. We've been making them burn money in all kinds of places because they are undisciplined and they can't change that. That is the character of their candidate and their campaign. So, there will be a moment where we persuade, but I will say this, and you may call me the cynic of the group, but I've done elections for 30 years now. I have won an awful lot of elections by personality and a very few by policy. It would be nice if we were debating this on policy. Yeah. It would be great if we, go back and had fights about, marginal tax rates or what's the carbon level in the atmosphere going to be. It would be great if we did that. But at the end of the day, more often than not, if I can come out with a hammer and turn the other guy into a villain or a stooge or an incompetent, I'm going to win. And that's just a harsh reality of politics. People like to hear things. They like to hear, I've got a plan. But honestly, when Elizabeth Warren came out with a healthcare plan that was 650 pages long, all I could think of was, I don't know how much time and effort they put into that, but about 8 people are going to read that. And 3 of them are Trump opposition researchers who are going to find the 10 things in it that scare the hell out of voters. So, those sort of fine-grained policy things almost never have the impact that campaigns that are full of hope and optimism believe.
But can I just say, I agree with you completely, Rick. And I don't deal with as many voters on your side of the aisle, but I just want to say, I think on the Democratic side, particularly voters of color, I think there's a lot of attention paid to policy. Here's the problem: getting to the actual policy in a digestible way. I think Democrats have a very challenging time of making messaging comprehensible. And so, when Donald Trump could get up before an audience and say, we're going to build the wall, there isn't a lot of intellectual curiosity there to say, but how? And who's going to pay for it? And how is that going to work? And so you can say these very simplistic elementary slogans and have people consume them as though they're the gospel. When I talk to, tens of thousands of voters over the years across the country, covering them, working on campaigns, et cetera, there are a lot of questions about policy. And because these mostly marginalized, disenfranchised communities are overly impacted, so they can't afford to not pay attention to policy. The challenge is someone is not going to read through a white paper. They're not going to, confirm everything they hear on television. And so a lot of people go off word of mouth. I mean, I even had, family members after Obama got elected, who definitely pay attention to policy, but we're not necessarily experts in politics. And so, they would say, we voted for Obama and now, the potholes on the streets are fixed and, the school board changed this. And it's like, yeah, Obama doesn't have anything to do with that. But you are very focused on what your neighborhood is like, what the school is like, where your kids go to school, what hiring is like, what the economy looks like. So I don't know how it is on the Republican side, but I do think there is some attention paid to policy. But they, not necessarily political connoisseurs, and they don't necessarily speak Beltway speak.
Some people do, but I will tell you, and Rich has probably seen this too. The one part of it is that voters lie all the time.
Yeah.
They lie all the time. When you ask them, do you care more about policy or personality? They'll say, well, I believe it's the socially desirable response to say, I want to think about policy and I want to read the plan. They never do. And I say this with admiration, by the way. Barack Obama's campaign themes and messages, hope and change, that's 2 words with 1 article in the middle. That's beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's perfect. It's what voters wanted to know and hear and feel in a time where we had war and an economic crisis. Donald Trump, Make America Great Again. It was a narrow cast message that fit on a trucker hat, and it went into the minds of these people who felt like they'd had their jobs stolen by trade deals and that the economy had passed them by and that the country didn't look like the white old America that they loved in Western Pennsylvania and Northeastern Ohio and Macomb County, Michigan. So short, sweet, declarative, active voice, things like that are really persuasive to voters.
We're talking about the 2020 election in Climate One with Rick Wilson, a longtime Republican strategist and co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Rich Tao runs a swing voter project that conducts focus groups with Obama-Trump voters in the upper Midwest. And Tiffany Cross, co-founder and managing editor of The Beat DC. Alex Cruz is a 45-year-old married man who lives outside Tampa. He grew up in Brooklyn and says over the years, he's voted for several Democratic presidential candidates and sat out a few other elections. He also often votes third party when there's one on the ballot. This November, Cruz says he's still not quite sure what he's going to do.
When I was more ignorant to politics, I may have been drawn to a personality type, how the person spoke, the mannerisms or something, without knowing everything that was underneath the whole system of how it works in politics and voting. Knowing too about the Democratic Party, apparently the Working Person's Party for people of color, for minority, and I felt like I was in that demographic growing up, being a Hispanic male. Seems like every administration has gone against everything that I would believe in. I don't believe in war or the war on drugs or war on anything. And so who do you vote for, right? There's only 2 people on the ticket. Biden really represents that system, status quo, but Trump supposedly doesn't. But at the same time, he still does status quo things. So I don't think it matters who you vote for. My plans are to write in a candidate. I still believe in the power of voting. And one idea is to have people from the bottom up get into politics and create parties of their own, grassroots, that oppose the 2-party system that we currently have. Maybe through several years, we can accomplish actual policy changes, environmental changes, economic changes that we need to see before it's too late.
That was Alex Cruz, who lives in the Tampa Bay area. Rick Wilson, we have never had we have Coke and Pepsi. We have more choice for soda and a lot of things, toothpaste, than we do political parties in this country. Other democracies have more choice. Why don't you spend all that money on, creating a third party, or if you've considered that, to give people really more choice?
Maybe I will. No, look, I think we're at an inflection point in our country where well, first off, in 2020, a third party vote in 2020 basically is going to reelect Donald Trump. The libertarians are not going to move off of Trump. They believe that that's probably their best bet right now to accomplish some of their things. And there's not really another center-right party out there that's going to draw sufficient numbers to disrupt Trump's electoral college map. I say that because I have helped run an independent presidential campaign once before, and it did not go well. It was not easy. Ballot access is nearly impossible. You can't get even anywhere near 270. You can't even get enough to blow the other guy off of getting 270. So, but I have a sense that our country is very close to a fragmentation point where a nationalist, populist, Trumpist party is born out of the wreckage of the GOP, where a center-right party is born out of whatever comes, from the kind of things we're doing and other folks are working on to try to restore limited government, constitutional adherence, etc. And I think the Democrats face a similar challenge where, and as Tiffany can certainly tell you, there is enormous, astounding energy on the progressive left. It is very fired up. Now, the flip side of that is there is for the Democrats more competence and campaign electoral experience and ability to raise the money you need to compete and deliver and win on the sort of more Clinton-Obama axis of the party. And as I said to somebody the other day, they're like, why is it that you guys are able to do the kind of things that Trump campaign won't do and Biden campaigns won't do? I said, because look, the secret of a good set of consultants is that we don't care what you think, and we're going to get to the X. We're going to get to the goal mark. And, the Democrats, to their advantage in 2018, learned you couldn't do a top-down model. You couldn't say, okay, we're going to only run AOC-style candidates in Western Pennsylvania and Arizona and Florida. We're going to only run AOCs. Instead, the speaker very wisely said, okay, well, we'll run AOC candidates in places they can win, and we'll run Connor Lamb candidates in places they can win. So the choice in a party like that is, do you stay as a sort of messy coalition, or do you hive off into a Bernie Sanders populist-style party, which could win in a few places, and a Clinton-Obama-style sort of broadly center-left technocratic liberalism party? It's a really, I think that inflection point is coming because the frustration on the progressive side is so enormous with the incremental approach of the centrist Democrats. And on the Republican side, that idea of Trumpism is a nationalist populist movement is very addictive to them. They want that, and they don't want to go back to the old, George Herbert Walker Bush, or 1,000 points of light or compassionate conservatism. They don't want that. They want a war.
Rich Doe, I want to get to climate and environment, because while there's this cycle is engaging, we have these macro issue of climate change. Do people, swing voters you're talking to, do they care about the climate? Do they care about the environment? Where does that rank in terms of issues, Rich Dow?
It's a great question. So I've been asking about climate and environmental issues throughout the entirety of the project. A couple things stand out. The first is that climate change is not a top-tier issue for these swing voters. It kind of falls in the middle between not being a hoax and not being an emergency. Basically, it's kind of a problem that's out there. So if you ask people, is it your number one issue? No one's going to say it's their number one issue, but a number of them will put it in their top 5, but it's not 1 or 2. The thing that we uncovered, to me, that is the most interesting, and I think from a campaign perspective, looking at it from Biden's side, is that when we ask people to evaluate the rollbacks that the Trump administration has advanced in the course of its term, that the folks in our group, one, were generally did not know about them at all, hadn't heard about them, but when they learned about them, discovered that they were remarkably negative. And we found that when we gave them a list of 17 of these items and had them score them on a scale from 0 to 10 about how much they supported or opposed them, they opposed all 17. And some of them, it scores at like 1, 1.5. Most of them were things related to clean water and clean air, particularly clean water. And when I asked them, if you knew that this was a problem in your neighborhood, how upset would you be? They were off the charts upset. So I think the opportunity potentially, if people in the environmental movement were to seize it, would be to make a case not about the rollbacks in the abstract, but the rollbacks as they affect people in the swing states. And if you can point to a specific rollback that undermine water quality or air quality where these people live and say that's because of Donald Trump or the Trump administration, that would be very powerful, because it would be a way to tie the things that they don't like about the president to something that affects them personally.
That's a
And
good point,
that's been
Rich.
such an issue so far.
Tiffany Cross, E&E News recently reported that Chevron's playing the race card via communication firms called CRC Advisors, warning communities of color that white people are trying to take away their jobs in the energy industry by advancing climate policies. What's your response to that?
I think it's unfortunate, not surprising, but definitely unfortunate, especially when you think about how communities of color are disproportionately impacted by climate, and you consider folks in New Orleans, who are impacted by the Deepwater spill. You think of folks in the Lowcountry, South Carolina, who are worried about water supply there. You think of folks in Long Beach, California, or people in Flint who have all the water they can that was, literally poisoning them. So it's sad that a corporation would try to pin this as, one group versus the other with nefarious intention. But I think this is not anything new and something that has consistently happened. These, communities have long since, even before Jim Crow, been in red line communities that are overly impacted by pollution. So yeah, I think it's unfortunate, but I was happy that story came to light. But again, though, the challenge is when you present climate issues to people who are dealing with so much already. People who are worried about paying their mortgage, people who are worried about violence and unrest, people who suffer from economic anxiety. I just think it's hard to make the case to them that this is something that's impacting your life long term when they're worried about what's impacting their life this very moment. There have been some great work by people to make that connection. It needs to continue. It doesn't get a lot of coverage in media, certainly not through the lens of the rising majority of the country. So I bet if you ask 10 people, what did you think about Chevron being disingenuous in this ad? Most people have no idea that ever happened.
Rick Wilson, Florida, it is a daily issue. There's sunny day flooding in Florida. There's sea level rise. It's happening. Yet explain to us the politics of climate in Florida, because it continues to perplex me how a state that's so vulnerable doesn't seem to be grappling with it.
Well, I think the number one issue in Florida that I've seen in our polling in Florida, I live in Florida, I've done a lot of campaign work here, that is the killer app of issues. Because look, people here in Miami, they're like, oh, the sea level's rising, and they're still buying property in Miami. Whether that's an economically wise decision or not is obvious, but they still are drawn to this area. The killer app and the Trump people, I cannot believe their incompetence in leaking this week, was that they said, we're going to open up offshore oil and gas lease drilling off of the coast of Florida. The last time I polled this, I admit it's been 4 years now since I polled it in 2016. 97% of Democrats opposed it, 91% of Republicans opposed it, and 90% of independents opposed it. There's no issue like that in the world. That's like saying we're going to replace school lunch with raw meat or something. It is so tone deaf politically. It is so perfect for any outside group or the Biden campaign to come into a state that actually does care about the environment in the broad space and the quality of life. That's the thing in Florida, though. Remember, a lot of these folks who come down to Florida, they know that they're only going to be here for 20 years. They're coming down here to retire and die for the most part. I'm a fifth generation Floridian, which is like being a unicorn, okay? So I care about it because I love my state and it's still got some weird, funky beauty here and there. But the idea about oil drilling is look, that's a double whammy. It's a positive climate thing to keep it off Florida shores, but it's also a great political issue. It's a burner of a political issue.
Well, we've been talking about the presidential race, but there's lots of Senate races, gubernatorial races. So, Rick Wilson, what about the other, the down ballot position of Republicans on climate? We hear some rumblings are trying to find a new story, a new narrative, because they've really been AWOL or just obstructionist, with the exception of, George H.W. Bush, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Very few Republicans in office have done much on climate. So,
Yeah.
what do you see down ballot on climate around the country?
Well, again, I think, as Rich mentioned, climate is not a deciding issue for voters
So,
in a
so
generic
energy,
election.
yeah. So frame it as electric cars, coal, those sorts of issues.
Yeah, and look, if you can show, as Tiffany mentioned, if you can say, listen, we're going to ban coal so your kids don't get asthma, that's how you talk about it.
Yeah.
People still look at climate, and we've seen this in our polling and our focus groups over the years. They still look at climate change, even when they say, okay, it's happening. They still look at it as something that is abstracted. And if the momentary, the mom who hears, okay, climate change is going to eventually raise the sea level in Orlando to the point where Orlando's beachfront, versus my kid has asthma and there are oil rigs off the shore and our water's polluted right now, the right now always wins over even when the downstream consequence is much, much worse, much more cataclysmic. The immediate, the immediate thing that falls closer on the hierarchy of needs at that moment is going to get the political leverage to be a changing factor in the way people behave.
Rich Tao, have you tested at all sort of the, greening the recovery, the COVID recovery, whether people want to see a move away from fossil fuels as the country comes out of COVID? Does that have appeal?
So one thing I've discovered in my years of doing message testing on a variety of issues is that the idea that you want to conflate multiple causes, no matter how good they are, is very off-putting to a large swath of the American populace. In other words, people want you to work on issue X and address that issue and not necessarily leverage in a separate issue, however much merit it might have, because it gets in the way of solving the problem at hand. So when I ask the swing voters, for example, about addressing clean energy and having Congress spend money on clean energy as a way to jumpstart the economy in the midst of this pandemic, they looked at me like I was crazy. Their response was, no, if you're going to spend the money, there are people unemployed, they need money, they need income, they need jobs. Focus on that. Don't try to specifically help one industry or one sector to perhaps the disadvantage of others. And it was an issue of fairness, and for them, that just didn't seem fair. So classically, Americans have a silo mentality when it comes to public policy. And that's one reason why they get bent out of shape over SSI benefits when it comes to Social Security, for example. And I think that you have to think about that in every message that you have about climate, is that if you're going to focus on climate, focus on it, or focus on clean energy if that's your message. But to intermingle other concerns into those, again, this isn't necessarily my personal opinion. This is what I hear from respondents all the time, which is focus on the issue at hand and don't mix issues together.
Tiffany Cross, there's a real energy right now on the left about climate justice and intersectionality and dealing with economic inequality and fossil fuels and housing, et cetera. So your response there to what Rich just said, that alienates a lot of key voters.
Yeah, I can see that because I think that even the wing on the left who's laser focused on climate, even with AOC, she ran on that issue, and that was a big issue for her. I still think and I say this with respect, it's but I still think there's a level of ignorance among voters when it comes to climate change. And when I say ignorance, I really just mean lack of knowledge. And so I don't know that if, to Rick's point, if you put something to someone in consumable terms, that it would alienate them. I think it comes more from people, a lack of understanding, from people not being focused on the issue or not recognizing how the issue disproportionately impacts them. But even on the Democratic side, from the politics that I've been involved in, I would still say the environmentalists represent a very small portion of the party. And that's not to say that everybody else doesn't care about it, but it's just not their issue. And when you think about all the things that are vying for our attention right now, all the issues that the country and the globe is dealing with, there's a level where people can get to where you're asking them to care about everything, so they care about nothing. So I think
Exactly right.
that's Rich's point about alienating some of those voters.
I want to talk about empathy. You know, Rick Wilson, a lot of your approach is to kind of, villainize and demonize. Clearly, that's what Donald Trump does. Where does empathy fit into this? Because, some people would say that presidents always are a reaction to what we've had before, that what America is looking for now is an empathetic leader, which clearly Donald Trump lacks.
I think you'll be seeing a lot more of that in the argumentation for Joe Biden. That Joe Biden, as a human, you can disagree with his policies all you want, but I met Biden in 1989 when I was a very young man working in the first Bush administration, and he was a guy who had a heart. He was a nice person, and everyone I've known in politics in DC for the last 30 years who knows Joe Biden likes him. In DC you get a reputation that you earn, and he earned a reputation as a decent and kind and caring person. A Republican friend of mine, a conservative Republican member of the Senate, one time said to me, he said, "I disagree with Joe Biden on every damn policy issue under the sun." He goes, "But someday I want Joe Biden to read the eulogy at my funeral because he's a good man. And I want somebody to remember me the way Joe Biden will remember me." And you're going to see that from, I think, the campaign. You're certainly going to see that from our group and many others going forward, that Joe Biden is a return to decency and competence. And this idea that we're going to fight about issues and we're going to fight about policy matters, and it's not going to be cast in every single time as it's the apocalypse. If I don't get this Supreme Court judge, the world ends tomorrow. And Biden is a transitional figure. He is the demographics and actuarial tables alone tell us that Joe Biden will not be president for, probably more than one term. We just know this from history. And the idea that he's going to be a transitional leader to help let us breathe out of Trumpism and move to something where we can have, the sort of political homeostasis America was accustomed to. Because for about 60 years, the left never held too much power for too long, and the far right never held too much power for too long. It was messy, it was noisy, went back and forth and up and down with who had power and who had influence and all those things. But it generally we sort of poked along as a country. Trump promised radical change in one direction. Biden is not promising radical change in the other, and I think that's wise politically and strategically. He is promising to not be the national jerk, to not be overtly cruel and horrible. And that's something that, is a limited appeal, as they say, for Trump.
We're talking about the 2020 election at Climate One with Rick Wilson, Rich Tao, and Tiffany Cross. I'm Greg Dalton. We're going to go to our lightning round. I'm going to ask each of our guests name a person, place, or thing and ask their immediate response, unfiltered, off the top of their head, with reckless abandon. Tiffany Cross, what's the first thing that comes to mind when I say Ronald Reagan?
A myth. I'd say he was a myth. Yeah.
Okay. Rick Wilson, what's the first one word or phrase that comes to mind when I say marry Trump?
Devastating.
New book coming out. Rich Tao, one word or phrase when I say the Lincoln Project.
Well, I got to be careful with that. Patriotic.
Rick Wilson, what comes to mind when I say Georgia Governor Brian Kemp?
Evil.
Rich Tao, the person Joe Biden should tap as his VP if he wants to win over swing voters in the Rust Belt.
Here's my answer. Doesn't matter.
Tiffany Cross, the person Joe Biden should tap as his VP if he wants to excite Black voters who have that Obama hangover.
There is nobody, but for lack of a perfect option, I'd say Senator Kamala Harris.
This is true. These are true or false. Tiffany Cross, true or false? You don't like making people uncomfortable.
False.
Rich Tao, true or false? Liberals have much better insight into the way conservatives think than vice versa.
False. Conservatives understand liberals far better than liberals understand conservatives.
Far better.
Tiffany Cross, true or false? The business model of corporate-owned media significantly constrains political discourse in the United States.
True.
Rick Wilson, true or false? You have solar on the roof of your home in the Sunshine State.
False.
Tiffany Cross, true or false? Your next car will be electric.
I'm carless, so false.
Rich Tao, true or false? Some swing voters you talk with think EVs and solar power are cool.
Yeah, I think so. They see it as the future. They're definitely inclined toward wanting to see that. The issue for them is cost. And can they afford it and should be subsidized.
Rick Wilson, true or false? Sarah Palin's nomination as vice president in 2008 helped usher in an era of know-nothingness and trivialized American politics.
Sadly true.
Yeah, that was one for, I think even Steve Schmidt, who was going to be on this initially, was involved in that, acknowledges. Last one for Rick Wilson, true or false? Republican leaders Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham sold America to Trump for a few dozen federal judges.
Truth.
I think I got that one. All right, thanks for getting through the lightning round. We have some questions. Lauren on online has a question. Please talk about voter suppression. Rick Wilson, this seems to be just like shamelessly out in the open. It's not even in, they're not even hiding it anymore.
For an awful long time in this country, voter suppression and voter fraud were both marginal activities. There were individual counties and individual people who would either try to prevent voting or who would engage in voter fraud. It has scaled up so quickly in the last 2 years, and it certainly existed, but it's scaled up to a point now where the implications, what's what I call Brian Kemp evil, because as a limited government constitutionalist conservative who believes in individual liberty and your right to vote being one of the most fundamental rights that we have, engaging in the kind of behavior that we're seeing there, the kind of behavior we're seeing out of the Trump campaign in the White House, trying to prevent early voting, especially in the time of a pandemic, it is reached a point, I think, where a constitutional remedy in the future may well be required, because it is really gone to the point of things like we're seeing today in Kentucky with one polling place for almost 600,000 voters. That's insanity.
Tiffany Cross.
So I love Rick, and I hate to disagree with my friend Rick, but I have to say, Rick, I don't think there's been an uptick. This has been something that's so prevalent, particularly in the African-American experience, in our entire political engagement in this country. I don't think you can ask any Black voter, has there been an uptick in the past 2 years, 4 years, 10 years? I think, throughout history, there has been a concerted effort to make the path to the ballot box very narrow. Brian Kemp didn't just start this 2 years ago. His entire career was predicated on voter suppression. He literally jailed people. There were, in Michigan during the 2016 election, there were 75,000 people in Detroit to have their ballots turned out. Detroit happens to be the most populous city in the country, overwhelmingly comprised of Black voters. You could go into every local legislature and look at their practices. And in the majority of the states, when you look at things that were designed to be laws, look at Mississippi, how they have designed how people are elected. It is specifically designed so Black votes are either diluted or completely left out of the process. I think why there may be thoughts that voter suppression has had an uptick is because the media for the first time started paying attention, whereas previously they used to just bake it into the cake. they would just assume that voter suppression was happening, and the only time they would cover it is if a race was competitive. During the 2018 elections, there was not a lot of voter suppression stories. In fact, the Tyndall report, which covers news stories, found that between September and November in 2018, across all the major networks, there were less than 10 stories on voter suppression. And we all know there was a lot of voter suppression happening in 2018. So Rick and I both agree that it's an issue. I just wanted to make the point that it's certainly not a new issue, and it's been something that Black communities, but a lot of other communities of color have been grappling with for a very, very long time.
My point about the scale up is particularly about the White House and the Trump campaign trying to suppress mail-in voting now. Yeah. You're absolutely right, Tiffany, especially for African-American voters over the decades. But they're trying to suppress early voting and absentee voting at scale, talking right. So nationally now where they're looking to disenfranchise
white people. That's why it became a story.
Tens of millions of people in states that they choose, that they feel at risk in. And Georgia is one of the states they now feel at risk in. The growing Hispanic population in Georgia, the growing African-American population in Georgia, the younger population in Georgia, they looked at that formerly red state and said, holy, we've got to stop this. And that's why Kemp has been very much front and center in efforts to turn down the ability to vote and to select lobbyists to select a voting system given them by electoral lobbyists who are not friends of representative government. Let's just say that.
Yeah. And
so Patricia,
sorry, go ahead.
Patricia online has a question. Can we revive the Voting Rights Act, and how?
The Supreme Court's pretty much dismantled that. Shut that down. I do think though this country is probably ready for a constitutional level of enhancement of the protection of the right to vote. I feel like that is something that we are legislatively would be very difficult, but I think that voters are feeling a little bit now like something's off kilter with voting, and I think that you could reach that point in the next few years.
I just think that we had an infrastructure. I mean, when SCOTUS killed Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, it devastated the voting process. And I think part of the reason why people didn't realize what an issue voter suppression was until there were mail-in ballots is because not everybody recognizes what voter suppression looks like. And so where you saw in Wisconsin, people standing in line in the cold and the rain, and the networks paid attention and said, oh, this is insane. Well, that happens every election cycle, state, federal, and local elections in most Black neighborhoods. They purge lists, they shut down polling sites. So every time it's time to vote, you have people waiting in line for hours. And it increased. It wasn't like it didn't exist before, but once the court killed Section 5, which said that these municipalities, which previously had a history of voter suppression, had to check in at the federal level before adjusting their laws, where they found loopholes in that before. Now they can be out in the open about it. Even when it comes to gerrymandering and redrawing districts, I mean, partisan gerrymandering is not illegal, but racial gerrymandering most certainly is. And you even see a lot of that happening, something Attorney General Eric Holder is pursuing at the federal level.
But Rick Wilson, you say that liberals are actually in a little bit of a fantasy land about the causes of their setbacks, gerrymandering, the Koch brothers, Citizens United. Tell us about that liberal bubble that you think that they you mentioned in your book.
I have beaten a lot more liberal and Democratic candidates by just being better at the work and having candidates who work harder, who work smarter, who raise more money, run better ads, have better messages than by any like weird secret sauce out there from Citizens United or Koch brothers or anything else. And I'd say this with tough love. None of the tools that my side uses are secret. None of them are secret. None of them are illegal. Some of them are illegal, but I don't use those. But none of the things that are out there to win elections are esoteric mysteries. It is a process. It is a skill. It is a discipline. And a lot of the times I've seen Democrats come out of races and say, oh, well, the dark money beat us. And often it didn't. or Citizens United. Well, Citizens United has not been here for that long, and in my career, we were winning thousands of seats across the country without it. So there is a tendency among some of my Democratic friends to do what my dad used to say, making excuses, not reasons. Now, sometimes you'll see a super PAC money come into a race and splash it and change the outcome. Lately, that's more on the blue side than the red side, since the Republican Party has shrunk down to its like tiny little stub of what it was. But I encourage Democrats to not ascribe to mysterious outside forces what can be laid on the surface of just not doing the hustle, not doing the work, not being out there recruiting great candidates. I mean, candidate recruitment is a weak spot for Democrats because there is a tendency, and I say this broadly, there is a tendency to want an ideological, homogeneous thing. So they tend to want to recruit candidates in a purpled seat or state that look like candidates that make them happy nationally. So that's when you get, well, actually, let me flip the example. If you gave me 20 Connor Lambs, I can go snatch up 15 more Republican seats for the Democrats. You give me 20 AOCs, no additional. It's going to be where it is. So the country is not as woke as Democrats often think it is. Even in places where they think it's woke, it's not as woke. And so, you doing the nut and bolt campaign stuff really matters. Doing good ads, doing good messaging, doing the work of organizing on the ground. And I say this a lot, Democrats are holistically bad at politics, but they're extraordinary at parts of it. So sometimes you'll get a candidate who is a very charismatic candidate, great speaker, articulate, brilliant, but he can't organize the field operation. Sorry, my dogs are going off downstairs. Barack Obama is one of those rare candidates. Bill Clinton's one of those rare candidates. But, too often you get a John Kerry. So it's not the externalities that get you, it's the fundamentals.
We're getting really close to the end here, but I just want to ask also, Rick Wilson, sort of, Donald Trump didn't come out of a vacuum. He was, part of some things that happened over time. What kind of soul searching have you done to kind of contributing to the tactics and the polarization that gave rise to Donald Trump? And what have other Republicans?
Sure. I mean, look, I wrote in Everything Trump Touches Dies, about a third of the book was about how we got to this point. I take a lot of responsibility for that. We built a set of tools, and those tools, when they were used in the hands of responsible adults, you might have disagreed with George W. Bush, but he was not so far outside the national bounds of behavior that people will forever like whisper in the dark to their children to frighten them. Donald Trump is an outlier, and this confluence of the overwhelming power of Fox News as the single normative factor in the Republican Party, reality television eating America's brain outside of the political space. Yeah. I mean, there are 700 reality TV shows being produced right now in America. People love it, and they believed in Donald Trump, the reality character. And so it was sort of, no matter how many times, and I'm sure Rich has seen this, in 15 and 16, we go into focus groups and say, what about his taxes? What about this? And then voters would go, oh, no, I saw it on TV. He's the richest man in America. He's a brilliant businessman. He's a great negotiator. He's this, he's that. You couldn't get over it because of television's power. So the confluence of that, of Fox, of the party becoming hived into two things, this oppositional defiant disorder, own the libs culture war class, and the older, there's nothing Trump folks hate more than apostate Republicans like me and Steve and John and Reed. There's nothing they hate more than people who don't want to play the oppositional defiant disorder game of modern republicanism. So, but I wrote a lot about it in the book, in the first book.
Thank you. Yep. Tiffany Cross, I know we're wrapping up the end here. There's also generational change happening here. We've talked a fair amount about race. Eliot Engel, chair of the House Foreign Relations Committee, been in Congress for 30 years. Facing a tough race from Jamal Bowman, former middle school principal in the Bronx, first-time candidate. Charles Booker is, challenging the establishment. Candidate, former Marine combat pilot at Amy McGrath in Kentucky. Tell us about sort of the generational fissures you're seeing here.
Yeah, I think that's such an issue. And, Rick, I was listening to you talk about some of the things that Democrats do wrong. And I found myself agreeing with a lot of what you said, because, to your question, Greg, I think there is the issue that some of these members die in their seats, and it's like you have to groom somebody to pick up the mantle and take the next step. And I'm disappointed that I don't see a lot of that happening. And there's also, even when it comes to widening the voting electorate, I mean, there are definitely spaces where Democrats benefit from keeping the electorate narrow, because that will bring in new voter base, younger voters who may not be as loyal to incumbent candidates. So look, this is time for introspection on all sides about what we can do to reimagine America and be the collective architects on what this next phase of government looks like. Mm-hmm. And I think it certainly says something that Charlie Booker came on the scene after being shunned by people in the Beltway, and he built this groundswelling in Kentucky by being progressive. And, Rick, I do hear you about AOC, but I would just add that there are these progressive pockets of the South. So maybe Alabama isn't woke, but Birmingham most certainly is. Maybe Georgia isn't woke, but Atlanta most certainly is. So I think there are pockets where there is space for younger, more progressive candidates to find their pathway. And then perhaps energize a new base of voters who, like I said, these younger voters, as we saw with the TikTok users and the Trump campaign, it's easy to dismiss that as a prank, but that was activism. That is young people saying, we do not like the direction of this country, and we may not be old enough to vote, but we want to make our voice heard, and shame people who are elevating and supporting this man who aims to destroy everything about our democracy. So I hope to see a sea change in some of the newer, younger voters, and I hope that it pushes Democrats to think a little more innovatively about how they run campaigns. I think Rick actually made some really good points about how that goes.
And we have a last question from YouTube. Steve asked whether Rick Wilson, Democrats are listening. And I would say the same to Rich Tao. Are Democrats listening to what you're saying? Rich Tao, are Democrats listening?
I think Democrats are listening. We feel like at the Lincoln Project, we've sort of illuminated a pathway. We've seen some of the advertising from the Democratic side, both in the super PAC world and the Biden campaign, pick up in edge and quality. They're not working to make every ad filled up with every single policy. I mean, that's truly one of the dirty little secrets is we talk about one thing per ad. We don't try to shove everything into it. We think the Democrats are listening in that regard. We also think they're listening in trying to avoid, culture war pitfalls and electoral pitfalls going forward. So we feel like we're making a difference and having a positive impact right now.
Quickly, Rich.
And I would say with the Swing Voter Project, which is swingvoterproject.com, that all of the videos of all of the sessions are available for free to anybody who wants to watch them. So if Democrats want to pull from it, or Republicans, it's out there. It's all public, and I'm happy to talk to anybody who asks me my opinion on it. So I'll leave it at that.
Climate One today, we've been discussing the 2020 election. Defeating Donald Trump is certainly the best thing that could happen for the climate. I'm Greg Dalton, and my guests today were Tiffany Cross, co-founder and managing editor of the Beat DC, author of the new book, Say It Louder, Black Voters, White Narratives, and Saving Our Democracy. Rick Wilson is a longtime Republican strategist and co-founder of the Lincoln Project. His latest book is Running Against the Devil, the plot to save America from Trump and Democrats from themselves. And Rich Tao runs a Swing Voter Project that conducts focus groups with Obama-Trump voters in the upper Midwest. Podcasts of this and other Climate One shows are available wherever you get your pods. Please help us get more people talking about climate by telling a friend. It really does help. Our thanks to our fantastic panel today, and thanks to you, our audience, joining us live. We'll see you next time, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.